His voice was gentle. Just breathe, let it happen. She sat there for a long time, Marco a solid presence beside her while the chaos continued in the ballroom beyond. Eventually her hands stopped shaking. Her breathing evened out. The world stopped spinning quite so fast. What happens now? She asked. The police will investigate. The Foundation's board will launch their own audit. The media will tear into her for weeks. Marco's tone was matter of fact. Your mother's life as she knew it is over. Everything she built is going to collapse, and me? That's up to you. Marco turned to look at her. You're free, Jane, actually free, you can do whatever you want now. The concept felt foreign. Freedom, choice, a future that wasn't dictated by someone else's cruelty. Jane had spent so long surviving that she'd never learned how to actually live. I don't know what I want, she admitted. Then figure it out. You've got time. Marco stood, offered his hand. But right now, we should get out of here before the press finds us. They left through a service entrance, avoiding the cluster of reporters and cameras that had gathered at the front. Marco's car was waiting, engine running. They slid into the back seat and the driver pulled away from the hotel, leaving the wreckage behind. Jane watched the city pass by the window. Chicago at night, all lights and shadows and possibility. She'd lived here her entire life, but it had never felt like home, just a cage she couldn't escape. Now, sitting in the back of Marco DeLuca's car with her mother's empire crumbling behind her, she wondered what it might feel like to actually belong somewhere. Thank you, she said quietly. For all of this, for she gestured vaguely everything. Marco's expression was unreadable. Don't thank me yet, the hard part's just starting. What do you mean? Your mother's going to fight back. She's got lawyers, connections, money she's hidden away. This isn't over just because she had a bad night. He met her eyes. Are you ready for that, for the long game? Jane thought about it, really thought about it. Her mother was vicious when cornered. That much was true. She'd lie, manipulate, play victim. She'd try every trick she'd ever learned to claw her way back to respectability. It would be ugly, prolonged, exhausting. But Jane wasn't the same person who'd walked into Marco's office 2 weeks ago. She'd learned how to stand up straight, how to throw a punch, how to look someone in the eye and refuse to flinch. She'd learned that she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever given her credit for. Yeah, she said. I'm ready. The car pulled up to Marco's building. They rode the elevator in silence, and when the doors opened on her floor, Marco walked her to her room. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow's going to be insane. Press requests, legal calls, probably a few dozen people trying to get a piece of you now that you're the story. Jane's stomach twisted. I don't want to be the story. Too late, you already are. But his tone was kind. Elena will handle the phone, you just focus on yourself, talk to Sarah. Process what happened tonight, don't let anyone rush you into decisions. What about you? What are you going to do? Marco's smile was faint. Make sure your mother's lawyers can't find any loopholes. Make sure the evidence is airtight. Make sure she actually pays for what she did. He paused. And make sure you stay safe. She's dangerous when she's desperate. You think she'd try something? I think she's lost everything that mattered to her. People in that position make stupid choices. His expression hardened. But she won't get near you. I'll make sure of that. Jane wanted to argue, to say she didn't need protection, that she could handle herself. But the truth was she felt safer knowing Marco was watching her back. She'd learned to trust him in a way she'd never trusted anyone. Okay, she said. I'll be careful. Good. Marco turned to leave, then stopped. Jane, what you did tonight, standing up to her like that, most people couldn't have done it. You should be proud. He left before she could respond. Jane went into her room, closed the door, and leaned against it. She should feel triumphant, victorious, but all she felt was tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that made even changing out of the dress feel like too much effort. She managed it eventually, trading the elegant gown for soft pajamas, washing the makeup off her face. In the mirror, she looked like herself again. Just Jane. Not the polished version she'd been at the gala, not the broken girl from 2 weeks ago, something in between. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Saw the news. Call me if you need to talk, anytime. Jane smiled despite everything. She didn't call, talking felt impossible right now, but she sent back a simple thank you and felt better for it. Sleep should have been impossible, but the moment Jane's head hit the pillow, she was out. Dreamless, heavy sleep that lasted until late morning when Elena knocked with coffee and the warning that Jane's phone was already ringing off the hook. Reporters, Elena said, setting down the tray. Lawyers, people claiming to be your relatives, I've been screening them all. Any I actually need to talk to. Not unless you want to. Mr. DeLuca says to take the day, rest, the world can wait. But the world, as it turned out, had other plans. Jane was halfway through her coffee when Marco appeared, expression grim. We have a problem. Her stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Your mother posted bail an hour ago and she's calling a press conference for this afternoon. He handed her his phone. The screen showed a news alert. Charlotte Whitmore was planning to make a statement claiming she'd been framed, that her daughter had been manipulated by organized crime, that the whole thing was a conspiracy. Jane's hands went cold. She's going to lie. She's going to make herself the victim. Of course she is. It's the only play she has left. Marco took his phone back. Question is, do we respond or do we let her dig her own grave? What do you think we should do? I think she's counting on you staying silent, on you hiding. She's going to paint you as unstable, controlled, not credible. His eyes were sharp. So I think you should show up, be visible, remind everyone who the real victim is here. Jane's pulse kicked up. The thought of facing cameras, reporters, her mother's accusations, it made her want to crawl under the bed and never come out. But she'd come this far, backing down now and do everything. Where's the press conference? The Regency Hotel. Noon. Marco checked his watch. We've got 2 hours. Then we'd better get ready. This time, Jane chose her own outfit. Simple black pants, a white blouse, hair pulled back. Nothing flashy. She looked professional, composed, like someone who had nothing to hide. Elena appeared with a makeup artist who covered the last traces of bruising, and by the time Jane looked in the mirror again, she barely recognized the confident woman staring back. Marco met her downstairs with Reese and 2 other security people Jane had seen around but never spoken to. You don't have to speak, he said as they headed to the cars. Just be there. Let them see you. That's enough. But Jane knew it wasn't enough. Not really. Her mother was about to stand in front of cameras and lie through her teeth. Someone needed to counter that narrative, and who better than the daughter she'd tried to erase? The Regency was swarmed with media when they arrived. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions. Marco's security cleared a path, and they made it inside without Jane having to answer anything. The press conference was being held in a ballroom smaller than the one from last night, but still packed with journalists. Charlotte was already there, sitting at a table on a raised platform, flanked by 2 expensive-looking lawyers. She'd clearly hired a stylist, too. She looked softer than usual, more maternal, with barely any makeup and her hair styled simply. The grieving mother, the wronged woman. It was a performance, and she was playing it perfectly. When Charlotte saw Jane enter, her expression flickered just for a second. Then the mask was back. Jane and Marco took seats in the back, refusing to be invisible. Several cameras swung their way. Jane kept her face neutral, hands folded in her lap, and watched her mother prepare to lie. Charlotte's lead attorney stood first, reading from a prepared statement. The usual legal language, denying all allegations, claiming the evidence was fabricated, promising lawsuits against Marco DeLuca for defamation and harassment. Then Charlotte herself took the microphone. I want to start by saying how much I love my daughter, she began, voice trembling just enough to sound genuine. Jane has struggled with health issues for years. I've done everything I could to help her, to protect her, to give her the care she needed. But recently she fell under the influence of someone who saw her vulnerability as an opportunity. Jane's jaw clenched. She felt Marco's hand find hers under the table, a silent reminder to stay calm. The man sitting in this room right now, Marco DeLuca, is a known criminal, Charlotte continued. He runs one of the most dangerous organizations in Chicago, and for reasons I don't fully understand, he targeted my daughter. He manipulated her, convinced her that I was the enemy. And now he's using her as a weapon against me. A reporter raised a hand. Mrs. Whitmore, what about the financial records, the evidence of embezzlement? Fabricated, one of the lawyers interjected smoothly. We have our own forensic accountants reviewing the foundation's books. We're confident we'll prove these accusations are baseless. And the insurance policy? Another reporter called out. Charlotte's eyes went hard for just a moment before softening again. A standard policy taken out for estate planning purposes. Nothing sinister. The fact that it's being twisted into something malicious just shows how far these people will go to destroy me. Jane couldn't take it anymore. She stood, the movement drawing every camera in the room. Charlotte's face went pale. Jane, sweetheart, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Jane's voice carried across the ballroom. Because everything you just said is a lie. The room erupted. Journalists shouting questions, cameras flashing. Charlotte's lawyers tried to regain control, but it was too late. Jane had the floor now. I don't have mental health issues, Jane said clearly. What I have is PTSD from 26 years of abuse at the hands of the woman sitting on that stage. What I have is documentation of every broken bone, every bruise, every time she put me in the hospital and convinced the doctors it was an accident. Jane, please. Charlotte stood, reaching out like she was trying to comfort a hysterical child. Don't touch me, don't pretend you care. Jane's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. You sent me to Marco DeLuca expecting him to kill me so you could collect $2 million. That's not love, that's not protection, that's attempted murder. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Miss Whitmore, you're clearly upset. Perhaps we should take a break. I'm not upset. I'm done being silent. Jane turned to address the room full of reporters. My mother is a criminal. She's stolen from the charity she runs. She's abused her daughter for decades. And now she's standing up here playing victim because she got caught. Don't let her fool you. She's very good at performing, but that's all it is, a performance. Charlotte's mask cracked completely. You ungrateful, she caught herself, forced the syrupy tone back. Jane, I know you're confused. That man has poisoned your mind against me, but I'm still your mother. I'll always love you, no matter what he's made you believe. Marco didn't make me believe anything. You did. Every time you hit me, every time you told me I was worthless, every time you made me feel like I deserved the pain. Jane's voice broke on the last word, but she pushed through. The only thing Marco did was give me a place to heal and teach me that I didn't have to live in fear anymore. She turned and walked out of the ballroom, Marco and his security team falling into step around her. Behind them, the press conference dissolved into chaos, reporters shouting questions, Charlotte's lawyers trying to restore order, cameras capturing every second of the meltdown. Outside, Jane made it to the car before her legs gave out. She collapsed into the seat, gasping for air, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a freight train. Marco slid in beside her. Breathe, you're okay, just breathe. I couldn't. She was lying, and I know, you did the right thing. His voice was calm, grounding. You told the truth, that's all you needed to do. Jane focused on breathing in, out, in, out. Slowly, the panic receded. When she could think clearly again, she looked at Marco. What happens now? Now, Marco's smile was grim. Now we let the truth do its work. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within hours, every news outlet in Chicago was running the story. Video of Jane's confrontation with her mother went viral. The foundation's board called an emergency meeting and suspended Charlotte indefinitely. 3 major donors publicly withdrew their support. The police announced they were opening a formal investigation into the embezzlement charges. And through it all, Jane stayed in Marco's building, watching the empire her mother had built collapse in real time. Sarah came by that evening for an emergency session. They talked for 2 hours about processing trauma, about confronting abusers, about the strange emptiness that came after finally getting justice. It helped. Not completely, but enough that Jane could sleep that night without nightmares. The next morning, Elena brought news that Charlotte's lawyers had reached out. They wanted to talk settlement. What kind of settlement? Jane asked. Marco, sitting across from her at breakfast, looked disgusted. The kind where she admits no wrongdoing, but agrees to stay away from you permanently. In exchange, you don't pursue criminal charges. Jane's coffee went cold in her hands. She wants me to let her walk. She wants to avoid prison. Yes. Marco's tone made it clear what he thought of that idea. What do you think I should do? I think that's your call, not mine. Marco leaned back. If you want her in prison, we can make that happen. The evidence is solid, but it'll mean a trial, months, maybe years of legal battles. You'll have to testify, relive everything, face her in court. Jane thought about that. Thought about sitting in a courtroom while her mother's lawyers tried to tear her apart. Thought about the media circus, the scrutiny, the endless questions. She'd just gotten free. Did she really want to spend the next year of her life chained to this fight? What happens if I take the settlement? She goes away, legally barred from contacting you. The foundation fires her. She loses her reputation, her career, most of her money. She doesn't go to prison, but her life as she knew it is over. Jane stared into her coffee. Prison felt like justice, but so did knowing her mother would spend the rest of her life watching everything she'd built turn to ash. Maybe that was punishment enough. Maybe Jane didn't need to destroy herself in the process of destroying her. I'll take the settlement, she said quietly, but I want one more thing, name it. I want her to admit what she did. In writing. A full confession. Abuse, embezzlement, the insurance policy, all of it. And if she ever tries to hurt anyone else, that confession goes public. Marco's smile was sharp. I'll have my lawyers draft it. The settlement was finalized within a week. Charlotte Whitmore signed a 20-page document detailing every crime she'd committed, every lie she'd told, every time she'd raised a hand to her daughter. She gave up control of the foundation. She agreed to a permanent restraining order. She surrendered nearly all of her liquid assets to pay back what she'd stolen. And in return, Jane agreed not to press charges. It felt anticlimactic. After everything, after all the fear and pain and rage, it came down to signatures on paper. But when Jane saw her mother's name scrawled at the bottom of that confession, she felt something release in her chest. It was over. Really, truly over. Charlotte Whitmore's life imploded in the weeks that followed, exactly as Marco had predicted. The scandal consumed her. Former friends refused her calls. The charity world blacklisted her. She tried once to release a statement claiming coercion, but Jane's lawyers shut it down immediately, threatening to release the confession. After that, Charlotte went silent, disappeared from public life entirely. Jane heard through Marco's network that her mother had left Chicago, some small town in another state where nobody knew her name, starting over from nothing, just like she'd always forced Jane to do. The irony wasn't lost on her, but Jane wasn't thinking about her mother anymore. For the first time in her life, she was thinking about herself, about what she wanted, who she wanted to become. The answer surprised her. 3 months after the settlement, Jane stood in front of an empty warehouse on the south side of Chicago and tried to see what it could become. The building was a disaster. Broken windows, water damage, decades of neglect turning the interior into something that looked more like a crime scene than a future. But it was hers. Bought with the settlement money her mother had been forced to pay back. Every dollar a small piece of justice. "You're sure about this?" Marco asked, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets, surveying the wreckage with a critical eye. "No," Jane admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." She'd been thinking about Patricia Weston's offer to join the foundation board, had even attended a few meetings, sat through presentations about fundraising and donor relations, and all the bureaucratic machinery that kept charities running. It was important work, necessary work. But sitting in those conference rooms, listening to people talk about helping vulnerable women in abstract terms, Jane had realized something. She didn't want to manage programs from a distance. She wanted to build something real, something that would have saved her if it had existed when she needed it. A shelter. Not the kind with institutional beds and fluorescent lighting and rules that felt like punishment. Something different. A place where women escaping abuse could actually heal, could learn to be whole again, could discover they were worth more than what had been done to them. The idea had taken root during one of her sessions with Sarah. They'd been talking about what healing actually looked like, and Jane had mentioned how Marco's building had felt like sanctuary, the safety of it, the way Alina had appeared with food and clothes without Jane having to ask, the gym where Risa had taught her to fight back, the therapy sessions that had helped her separate her mother's voice from her own thoughts. What if other women could have that? Jane had said. Not just a bed and a social worker's phone number. Actual support. People who understand. Sarah had smiled. Then you should build it. So here she was, staring at a warehouse that looked like it should be condemned, trying to imagine it full of life and hope and second chances. Marco was already pulling out his phone. "I know a contractor. He owes me a favor. Can have a crew here tomorrow to assess the damage." "Marco, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He glanced at her. "You're doing something good here. Let me help." Jane had learned not to argue when he used that tone. Over the past 3 months, she'd learned a lot about Marco DeLuca. That underneath the crime lord exterior was someone who understood survival, who respected strength, who kept his word no matter what it cost him. She'd learned that he was loyal to the point of stubbornness, that he valued competence over sentiment, and that he had a surprising soft spot for lost causes. She'd also learned that she trusted him more than she'd ever trusted anyone, which was terrifying and comforting in equal measure. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." Marco made a call. Within an hour, a man in work boots and a hard hat showed up to walk through the space. Jane followed, taking notes, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the scope of what she was attempting. The contractor, a gruff older man named Frank who spoke in clipped sentences, pointed out structural issues, electrical problems, plumbing that would need to be completely replaced. "It's a lot of work," Frank said finally, "but the bones are good. You've got solid foundation, good ceiling height. Could be something special if you do it right." "How long?" 6 months if you want it done fast, 8 if you want it done properly." Frank pulled out a battered notebook, started sketching rough plans. "You'll need permits, inspections, the whole bureaucratic mess, but it's doable." Jane felt something spark in her chest. Hope maybe, or purpose. Let's do it properly. Frank nodded, already calculating numbers. "I'll have an estimate for you by Friday." After he left, Jane and Marco stood in what would eventually be the main common area, surrounded by construction dust and peeling paint and the ghosts of what the building used to be. "You're really doing this," Marco said. Not a question. "Yeah, I really am." Jane turned to face him. "I know it's crazy. I know I have no experience running anything like this, but I have to try." "If I don't," she stopped, searching for the right words. "If I don't do something with what happened to me, then it was all just pain with no point. This way, maybe it means something." Marco's expression softened in a way she rarely saw. "It already means something. You survived. That's enough. Not for me, not anymore." Jane looked around the empty warehouse. "I want to build something. Leave something behind that's better than what I found." "Then you will." He said it like it was fact, like her success was inevitable. Jane wished she had that kind of certainty. But maybe that was what faith looked like. Someone believing in you when you couldn't quite believe in yourself yet. The months that followed were controlled chaos of permits and construction and endless logistical nightmares. Jane threw herself into it completely, learning as she went. She hired an architect who specialized in trauma-informed design. She consulted with social workers, therapists, survivors of domestic violence. She visited other shelters, took notes on what worked and what didn't, and slowly began to shape a vision of what her place would be. Not a warehouse anymore. A home. 12 private rooms, each with its own bathroom and space for women to feel safe. A communal kitchen where residents could cook together if they wanted or eat alone if they needed to. A therapy room, a gym. Risa had already agreed to teach self-defense classes. A children's playroom because Jane knew too many women stayed in dangerous situations because they had nowhere to take their kids. She named it Phoenix House. Alina said it was too on the nose, but Jane didn't care. She liked the symbolism, rising from ashes, becoming something new. Marco watched from the sidelines, offering help when she asked, but never pushing. He connected her with lawyers who helped navigate the nonprofit paperwork. He made sure the construction crew stayed on schedule. He showed up sometimes in the evenings to check on progress, hands in his pockets, asking questions that made it clear he actually cared about what she was building. "You're different," he said one night as they stood in the half-finished kitchen reviewing paint samples. Jane looked up from the color swatches. "Different how?" "More settled. Like you know where you're going now." He leaned against the counter. "When I first met you, you looked like you were bracing for a hit every second. Now you look like you'd hit back." "I had a good teacher." Jane set down the samples. "Actually, I had several. Risa taught me to fight. Sarah taught me to heal. Alina taught me that kindness doesn't have to be conditional." She met his eyes. "And you taught me that I was worth fighting for." Marco's expression did something complicated. "Jane, I'm not saying that to make it weird. I'm just stating a fact." She picked up a deep blue swatch, held it to the wall. "You could have turned me away that first night, let my mother's plan play out, but you didn't. And I'm alive because of that choice." "You're alive because you chose to be," Marco corrected. "I just gave you the space to make that choice." "Semantics," Jane smiled. "Either way, thank you for everything." He was quiet for a moment, studying her in that intense way he had. Then he pushed off the counter. "The blue's better than the gray, more welcoming." And just like that, the moment passed. But something had shifted between them. Something Jane couldn't quite name, but felt nonetheless settling warm in her chest. Sarah noticed during their next session. "You look happy," she observed. Jane considered that. Happy felt too simple for what she was experiencing, but there was definitely something there. A sense of rightness, of moving toward something instead of just running away. "I'm building something that matters," Jane said. "That feels good." "And Marco, how's that relationship evolving?" Jane's face heated. "It's not a relationship, he's just helping." Sarah's smile was knowing. "Uh-huh. And how do you feel when you're around him?" "Safe, challenged, like I can be myself without apologizing for it." Jane paused. "Is that weird, that I feel that way about someone who's technically a criminal? I think human connection is complicated, and I think you're allowed to have feelings for someone who's shown you kindness." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "But Jane, you should also think about what you want moving forward. Are you rebuilding your life to eventually include a relationship, or are you focusing on yourself right now?" "I don't know." "Both." "Neither." Jane laughed, frustrated. "I've never had a normal relationship. I don't even know what that looks like." "Then maybe start by being honest with yourself and with him. See what happens." But honesty felt terrifying when Jane didn't even know what she wanted to be honest about. So she focused on Phoenix House instead, pouring all her confused feelings into tile choices and furniture orders and staffing plans. She hired carefully. A house manager named Lisa who'd escaped an abusive marriage and understood what residents would need. 2 counselors who specialized in trauma. A security consultant, Risa had insisted on proper safety measures, who designed a system that kept people out without making residents feel trapped. Every decision was intentional, designed to create the kind of safety Jane wished she'd had. 6 months into construction, Patricia Weston showed up unannounced. She walked through the space with sharp eyes, asking pointed questions, nodding occasionally. "This is good work," Patricia said finally. "You should present it to the foundation board. We have discretionary funding for projects like this. Could cover your operational costs for the first 2 years." Jane blinked. "You do that?" "If you make a convincing pitch, yes. The foundation needs to rebuild its reputation after your mother's disaster. Funding a project run by her daughter, the woman who exposed her, makes us look principled." Patricia's smile was calculating. "Plus, this is actually good work. That doesn't hurt." The board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Jane spent every spare moment preparing, building a presentation that laid out Phoenix House's mission, its budget, its projected impact. Marco helped her rehearse, playing devil's advocate, asking the hard questions board members would ask. "What makes this different from existing shelters?" he challenged. "We're not just providing beds, we're providing comprehensive support, therapy, job training, legal advocacy, childcare, everything a woman needs to actually rebuild her life, not just survive day to day." Jane clicked to the next slide. "Existing shelters do important work, but they're overwhelmed and underfunded. We're offering something more intensive, smaller capacity, but deeper impact." Marco nodded, satisfied. "Better. What about sustainability?" They went through it again and again until Jane could recite the whole pitch in her sleep. By the time the board meeting arrived, she was as ready as she'd ever be. The presentation went better than she'd hoped. The board members asked tough questions, but seemed genuinely interested. Patricia backed her up when needed, adding weight to Jane's proposals. And when the vote came, it was unanimous. The foundation would fund Phoenix House's operations for 2 years with the possibility of renewal based on outcomes. Jane walked out of that conference room feeling like she could breathe properly for the first time in months. She called Marco immediately. "We got it. Full funding." His voice was warm. Of course you did. You were brilliant. I was terrified. Fear and brilliance aren't mutually exclusive. She could hear the smile in his voice. Congratulations, Jane. You earned this. After they hung up, Jane sat in her car for a long time just processing. A year ago, she'd been nothing, nobody. A woman so broken, she'd accepted her own death as inevitable. Now she was the director of a nonprofit, preparing to open a shelter that would help dozens of women escape the same hell she'd survived. The transformation felt impossible, like it had happened to someone else. But it was real. She'd done this, built it from nothing but pain and determination, and the kind of stubborn hope that refused to die no matter how hard her mother had tried to kill it. Phoenix House opened on a cold morning in November. Jane stood in the completed common room, walls painted that deep welcoming blue, furniture arranged to create intimate conversation areas. Morning light streaming through windows that had been replaced and reinforced, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. It was perfect. Not in the Instagram-filtered way, not sterile or institutional. It looked like a home, like a place where people could actually heal. Elena had helped with the final decorating, bringing in plants and artwork and small touches that made spaces feel lived in. Risa had installed a punching bag in the gym, along with mats and equipment for her self-defense classes. Sarah had set up the therapy room with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Everyone who'd helped Jane rebuild herself had contributed to rebuilding this space for others. And Marco had shown up that morning with coffee and breakfast pastries for the entire staff, refusing to take credit for any of the construction or legal work or connections that had made this possible. "Today's about you," he'd said when Jane tried to thank him. "Let yourself have this." The first resident arrived that afternoon. A woman named Maria, 23, with a black eye and a little girl clutching her leg. Lisa welcomed them, showed them to their room, explained how everything worked. Jane watched from a distance, remembering what it felt like to walk into safety for the first time, how foreign it had seemed, how impossible to trust. Maria's daughter, Sophia, 4 years old, spotted the playroom and gasped. "Mama, look, toys. You can play, Mija," Maria said softly. "It's safe here." Jane had to walk away before she started crying. She found Marco in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his coffee, giving her space to feel what she needed to feel. "First residence here," Jane managed. "I saw." His voice was gentle. "How you holding up? I don't know. It feels huge. What if I can't help her? What if this whole thing is just me pretending I know what I'm doing? Then you'll figure it out, same way you figured out everything else." Marco set down his coffee. "Jane, you built this. You made something real out of your pain. That takes courage most people don't have. Stop doubting yourself." "It's hard not to. My mother spent 26 years telling me I was worthless. Your mother was wrong about everything, including that." He crossed his arms. "Look around. This exists because you made it exist. That's not worthless. That's powerful." Jane looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. This man who'd saved her life without being asked, who'd helped her destroy her mother's empire, who'd stood beside her through every terrifying step of rebuilding herself, who'd never asked for anything in return. She'd been halfway in love with him for months and hadn't let herself acknowledge it because it felt too complicated, too messy, too soon after everything with her mother. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe she needed to be honest. "Marco," she stopped, courage failing. He waited, patient as always. "Thank you," she said instead, "for all of this, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Something flickered across his face, disappointment maybe, but he just nodded. Anytime. The moment passed. Jane went back to work, greeting new residents, helping staff settle into routines, making sure everything ran smoothly. But that almost confession haunted her, replaying in her head during quiet moments. Phoenix House filled up quickly. Women arrived broken and scared, carrying trauma like luggage. Jane watched them slowly unfold, learning to trust the safety, to believe they deserved more than what they'd survived. She saw herself in each of them, the flinching, the apologizing, the way they made themselves small, like taking up space was a crime. And she watched them heal, watched therapy and community and safety do their slow, necessary work. Watched women who'd been beaten down start standing straighter, speaking louder, believing they were worth fighting for. It was exhausting and beautiful, and everything Jane had hoped it would be. 3 months after opening, she was in her office late reviewing applications for a grant that would let them expand capacity when Marco appeared in the doorway. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." Jane set down her pen. "What's up?" Marco came in, closed the door behind him. He looked serious in a way that made Jane's stomach drop. "I need to tell you something," he said. Jane braced herself. "Okay, I'm getting out." He said it simply, like it wasn't the most shocking thing he could have said. "The family business, all of it, I'm done." Jane stared at him. "What? Why?" "Because I'm tired of living that life. Tired of the violence, the paranoia, the constant waiting for someone to make a move." He sat in the chair across from her desk. I've been thinking about it for a while since the night I met you actually. Watching you rebuild yourself made me realize I could do the same thing, choose something different. What are you going to do instead? Legitimate business. I've got investments, properties, enough clean money to start over. He met her eyes, and I want to help here. With Phoenix House? Not financially, you don't need my money anymore, but with security consulting, legal navigation, all the background work that keeps places like this running. Jane's heart was pounding. You want to work with me? I want to work with you for you, whatever makes sense. He leaned forward. Jane, I've spent 20 years building an empire I don't even want anymore. Watching you build something that actually matters, it made me realize how empty my life has been. I want to be part of something real, and I want to be around you while I do it. The confession hung in the air between them. Marco, Jane's voice came out shaky. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I care about you. I have for months. I'm saying that helping you has been the best thing I've done in years. And I'm saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like to see where this goes. He paused. But I need you to know I'm not the same person I was. I'm choosing to be different. For myself, yeah, but also for you. Jane stood, came around the desk, and did something she'd been wanting to do for months. She kissed him. It was tentative at first, testing, but when Marco's arms came around her, it deepened into something certain. Something that felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, Jane was breathless. I've been wanting to do that for a while, she admitted. Marco's smile was real, warm, nothing like the cold calculation she'd seen that first night. You should have. I was scared of messing this up, of losing you if it went wrong. You're not going to lose me. He cupped her face gently. I'm all in, Jane. Whatever this is, wherever it goes, I'm all in. Jane believed him, not because he said it, but because she'd watched him prove it over and over for the past year. Marco DeLuca kept his promises, and if he said he was choosing her, choosing this, then he meant it. Okay, she said. Then let's figure this out together. The next 6 months were a study in building something new. Marco stepped away from his organization gradually, clears throat, transferring operations to his second-in-command, making it clear he was out for good. It wasn't clean. There were people who didn't believe him, who thought it was a trick, who tried to pull him back in. But he held firm, and eventually they accepted it. He moved into a condo in the same neighborhood as Phoenix House. Started showing up for dinner service, talking to residents, offering the kind of steady male presence many of them had never experienced without violence attached to it. He was careful, respectful, never pushing. And slowly the women learned to trust him the way Jane had. Risa found it hilarious. Never thought I'd see the day Marco DeLuca serves spaghetti to domestic violence survivors. Life's weird, Marco said, mildly stirring sauce. Jane watched him navigate this new world, so different from the one he'd left behind, and felt something in her chest settle. This was right, not perfect because nothing was perfect, but right in the way that mattered. They took it slow, both of them learning what a relationship looked like when it wasn't built on fear or control. Marco taught Jane what healthy boundaries felt like. Jane taught Marco that vulnerability wasn't weakness. They fought sometimes, about finances, about her working too much, about his protective instincts that occasionally veered into controlling, but they learned to fight fair, to apologize when they screwed up, to choose each other even when it was hard. Sarah approved, naturally. You're both doing the work, that's what matters. Elena was less subtle. About time you two figured it out. I've been waiting for this since the beginning. And Risa just punched Marco's shoulder and told him if he hurt Jane, she'd break both his kneecaps. He promised she'd get the chance if it came to that. 1 year after Phoenix House opened, Jane stood in front of the staff and residents for their anniversary celebration. The common room was full. Women who'd come through the program and moved on. Women still in residence, staff members, volunteers, and Marco standing in the back with his arms crossed and pride written all over his face. When I started this, Jane said, voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke her, I wanted to build something that would have saved me. A place where women could be more than their trauma, where they could remember they were whole people who deserved safety and respect, and a second chance. She looked around the room at faces she'd come to know, Maria, who'd arrived with a black eye and was now enrolled in nursing school. Keisha, who'd been so broken she couldn't speak for the first week and was now leading peer support groups. Amara, who'd come with 3 kids and no hope and was working full-time while saving for an apartment. You've all taught me that healing isn't linear. It's messy and hard and sometimes it feels impossible, but it's also worth it every single time. Jane's voice cracked. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for being brave enough to choose yourselves. And thank you for showing me that survival can become something beautiful. The applause was thunderous. Women stood, cheering, some crying. Jane felt tears streaming down her own face and didn't bother wiping them away. After the celebration wound down, she found Marco in the garden they'd built out back. He was sitting on a bench, face tilted toward the evening sun. You did good in there, he said as she sat beside him. We did good. None of this happens without you. Ah, I think you'd have figured it out. But he smiled, pleased. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights blink on as darkness fell. I've been thinking, Marco said eventually, about what comes next. For us. He turned to face her. I love you, Jane. I think I've loved you since you shook my hand in my office and decided to fight. And I want to build a life with you, a real one. Jane's breath caught. Marco, I'm not proposing, not yet. I know we're still figuring this out. He took her hand, but I want you to know that's where I'm headed. Toward a future with you in it. Permanently? Jane looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd stood beside her while she rebuilt herself, who'd chosen to become someone better because he'd seen what better could look like. She thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, broken and silent, and convinced she was worthless. That girl never could have imagined this. A life built on purpose instead of pain, surrounded by people who chose to be there, with someone who loved her not despite her scars, but because of everything she'd survived to get here. I love you too, she said, and I want that future. With you. Marco kissed her, soft and certain, a promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. When they finally pulled apart, Jane looked back at Phoenix House. Lights glowed in the windows. Inside, women were safe, healing, learning they were worth more than what had been done to them. Her mother had tried to erase her, turn her into nothing, make her disappear. Instead, Jane had become something her mother could never destroy. Someone who survived, who chose to rise, who transformed pain into purpose, and built something that would outlast them both. Phoenix House would help hundreds of women over the years, thousands maybe. Each one a testament to the truth Jane had learned the hard way, that survival was only the beginning. The real victory was choosing to live. And Jane Whitmore, no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer afraid, was finally fully alive.